I never thought silence could change a family. Not shouting. Not arguments. Not even harsh words. Just silence. It happened slowly, so quietly that at first I did not notice it at all. One day my house felt warm and full, just as it always had. And then, without warning, it began to feel different. Not empty. Not broken. Just unfamiliar. Like a place I still lived in but no longer belonged to. People often talk about daughters-in-law who are loud, demanding, or cruel. But Sana was not like that. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue with me. She did not tell me to leave. She did not even say anything hurtful. She simply changed everything without saying much. I remember the first time I felt it. I was standing in the kitchen, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. Saad and Sana were sitting in the living room, their voices low, their heads close together. I waited for Saad to call me like he always used to. "Mom, come sit with us." But the call never came. I stood there longer than I should have, pretending to be busy, listening to the sound of their voices without hearing the words. It was not jealousy that filled my chest. It was confusion. A soft, aching confusion that whispered, when did I stop being part of this moment? Saad had always been my world. From the day his father passed away, it was just the two of us. I raised him with care, with patience, and with a love so deep that I never imagined it could one day feel distant. I did not raise him expecting repayment. I raised him hoping he would build a life filled with respect and kindness. And he did. Just not with me at the center anymore. After his marriage, everyone told me, "This is normal. Sons grow. Lives change." I nodded, I smiled, I agreed. But no one told me how quietly it would happen. There was no goodbye moment. No clear line between before and after. Just small changes that stacked one on top of the other until one day, I woke up and realized I was living on the edges of my own family. Sana moved through the house gently. She spoke politely. She cooked her meals. She kept her space neat and orderly. There was nothing I could point to and say, this is where it went wrong. And that was the hardest part. There was no enemy to blame. No clear mistake to fix. Only a feeling. A feeling that I had become a guest in the home where I once made all the decisions. A feeling that my presence was tolerated, not needed. A feeling that love was still there, but it no longer reached me. Saad began to change too. Not in big ways. He still greeted me. Still asked if I was well, still respected me. But his attention was elsewhere. His time belonged to Sana. His plans included her first. His silence grew longer. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being sensitive, that this was what letting go looked like. But deep inside, my heart whispered a truth I was not ready to hear. Something had shifted, and it wasn't coming back. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around me. The walls held memories of laughter, of shared meals, of late-night talks with my son. Now those memories felt like echoes from another lifetime. I did not cry loudly. I did not complain. I did not confront anyone. I carried my pain quietly, the way mothers often do, folded neatly between daily chores and polite smiles. 'Cause what could I say? That my daughter-in-law changed everything without saying much. That my son drifted away without realizing he was doing it. That love, when rearranged, can hurt just as deeply as love that is taken away. I did not know then that this was only the beginning. That the small silences would grow heavier. That the distance would deepen. That one day I would look at my son and feel like I was watching him from behind a glass wall. Close enough to see, too far to touch. This is not a story about anger. It is not a story about blame. It is a story about quiet loss. About change that comes wrapped in politeness. About love that remains, but no longer reaches you the same way. And this is how it began. Before Sana entered our lives, my world moved at a slow, familiar pace. It was not a perfect life, but it was steady, and that steadiness gave me comfort. Saad and I shared a rhythm built over many years, shaped by loss, love, and quiet understanding. After his father passed away, The house felt too big and too quiet for a long time. But slowly we learned how to fill that silence together. Saad was still young when his father left this world. I remember holding his small hand at the funeral, feeling his fingers tremble in mine. From that day on, I promised myself that I would be both mother and father to him. I worked harder than I ever had before. I learned to make decisions alone. I learned to hide my own fears so that he would feel safe. And in doing so, we grew very close. Our home became a place of simple routines. Mornings began with tea and soft conversation. Evenings were spent sharing meals and stories from the day. Saad would talk about his studies, his friends, his dreams. I would listen, nodding, offering advice only when he asked for it. There was respect between us, but also warmth. He trusted me and I trusted him. As Saad grew older, I began to prepare myself for the day he would marry. I knew that no son stays a child forever. I understood that his life would change, and that someone else would one day become the center of his world. I told myself I was ready for that moment. I believed that love expands, that there is room in the heart for many bonds. When Saad told me about Sanaa, I listened carefully. He spoke of her gently, with a softness in his voice that made me smile. I could hear that she mattered to him. I asked him questions not out of suspicion but out of interest. Where was she from? What did she enjoy? What kind of life did she imagine for herself? Saad answered with ease, happy to share. When I first met Sanaa, she was quiet and reserved. She greeted me respectfully, her eyes lowered, her voice soft. I saw in her someone who was careful with her words, someone who observed more than she spoke. I took that as a good sign. Not everyone is loud with their feelings, I told myself. Some people express themselves through actions rather than words. The wedding was simple and beautiful. Family and friends gathered, laughter filled the air, and for a while I felt nothing but joy. I watched Saad as he stood beside Sanaa, his face calm and proud. In that moment I felt relief. I had done my duty. I had raised a good man. I had given him the foundation he needed to build his own family. After the wedding, Sanaa moved into our home. I tried to give her space from the beginning. I did not interfere with her routines or her choices. I remembered how difficult it can be to adjust to a new household. I wanted her to feel comfortable, to feel accepted. I believed that kindness would naturally bring us closer. In the early days, things were peaceful. Sanaa cooked her meals and I cooked mine. We exchanged polite conversations, asked each other how our day had been. Saad moved between us easily, unaware of any tension. I told myself that this was how a new family settled into place. But slowly, almost without notice, the balance began to shift. Saad started spending more time in his room with Sanaa. Their conversations grew quieter, more private. Meals that were once shared became separate. I would prepare food as I always had, only to realize that they had already eaten. I told myself not to take it personally. Married life requires privacy, I reminded myself. Still, a small ache began to form in my chest. It was not sharp or sudden. It was dull and constant, like a weight that never fully lifted. I missed the way Saad used to sit with me, the way he would ask for my opinion, the way he would share his worries. Those moments were becoming rare. Sanaa remained polite but distant. She did not ask for my help, nor did she offer hers. We lived under the same roof, yet our lives barely touched. I tried to start conversations to find common ground, but they often ended quickly. There was no hostility in her tone, just a quiet separation. I wondered if this was normal. Perhaps this was simply the way things were meant to be. Perhaps I was holding on too tightly to the past. I reminded myself to be patient, to give them time. Change does not happen overnight, I told myself. Families need time to adjust. But deep inside I felt something slipping away. I noticed it in the small details. Saad no longer told me when he would be late. He no longer asked if I needed anything from the market. His phone was always in his hand, his attention often elsewhere. When I spoke, he listened, but his mind seemed distant, as if he was already thinking of something else. I did not blame Sana. Not directly. She had not done anything wrong. She had not spoken harshly or acted unkindly. And yet, her presence had changed the shape of my life. The center had shifted, and I was standing at the edges, unsure of where I belonged. I kept these thoughts to myself. I did not want to burden Saad with my feelings. I did not want to create conflict where none seemed to exist. So I smiled, nodded, and carried on. I told myself that love does not disappear. It only changes form. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I began to understand that this change was deeper than I had expected. The closeness I once shared with my son was fading, not because of anger or misunderstanding, but because of quiet choices made day after day. This was the calm before the storm, though at the time, I did not recognize it as such. I still believed that things would settle, that we would find a new balance. I did not yet know that the small distances forming between us would soon grow into something much harder to ignore. And so, the story continued, gently moving toward a place I was not prepared for. The changes did not arrive all at once. They came slowly, in small moments that were easy to dismiss if you did not look at them closely. At first, I told myself that I was only adjusting to a new rhythm. A married son has a different life, I reminded myself. A new home within the same walls takes time to settle. But time did not soften the distance, it sharpened it. I began to notice how Saad's routines no longer included me. He would leave early in the morning without saying goodbye, returning late with tired eyes and a quiet greeting. When I asked how his day had been, his answers were brief. Not unkind, just incomplete. As if the fuller version of his life was now reserved for someone else. Sometimes I would sit in the living room pretending to read, listening to the soft sounds coming from their room. Their laughter floated through the hallway like something that did not belong to me anymore. I did not feel anger. I felt left behind. Sana remained calm and respectful, but distant in a way that was hard to explain. She did not include me in her plans, nor did she ask about mine. If I spoke, she listened politely. If I stayed quiet, she did not notice. It was as if we were two separate worlds sharing the same roof. One afternoon I cooked Saad's favorite meal. I remembered how he used to ask for it whenever he felt tired or stressed. I prepared it carefully, placing everything neatly on the table. When Saad came home, he smiled faintly and said, "We already ate." That was all. I nodded and smiled back. But after he left the room, I quietly packed the food away, my hands trembling just a little. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. I stared at the ceiling and wondered when I had stopped knowing what my son needed. Or worse, when he had stopped needing me at all. The thought settled heavily in my chest, making it hard to breathe. The conflict was never spoken. That was what made it so painful. There were no arguments to resolve, no harsh words to forgive, only silence, only assumptions, only emotions that had nowhere to go. I tried to talk to Saad once. Just once. I asked him if everything was all right between us. He looked surprised, almost confused. "Of course, Mom," he said gently. "Why would you think otherwise?" I wanted to tell him everything. How invisible I felt. How the house no longer felt like my home. How I missed him even when he was just a room away. But the words stayed trapped inside me. Instead, I nodded and said nothing more. After that, I stopped trying. Sana's presence grew stronger in Saad's decisions. Small things first. Where they would go on weekends. What they would eat. How they would spend their evenings. I learned about these choices after they were already made. Not because anyone was hiding them from me, but because I was no longer part of the conversation. There were moments when I felt like a visitor asking permission in my own home. I began spending more time alone in my room, finding comfort in quiet activities. I folded clothes slowly. I cleaned spaces that were already clean. I prayed longer than usual, asking for patience more than answers. Sometimes I wondered if Sana noticed my withdrawal. If she saw how I slowly stepped back, making room for her in every corner of my life. But if she did, she never acknowledged it. She never pushed me away. She simply never pulled me closer. The distance between Saad and me grew wider with each passing week. He no longer asked for my advice. He no longer shared his worries. He seemed happy, and that should have been enough for me. But happiness seen from afar can still hurt. One evening, I overheard a quiet conversation between Saad and Sana. They were talking about moving out someday. Not immediately, but eventually. Sana's voice was calm, practical. Saad agreed with her easily. They spoke as if I were not there, as if my feelings were not part of the equation. That night I cried for the first time in a long while. Not loudly. Just silent tears that soaked into my pillow. I cried for the closeness we had lost. For the unspoken words. For the feeling of being replaced not by cruelty but by change. I did not blame Sana. Blamed time. Blamed life. I blamed myself for not knowing how to hold on without holding too tight. The rising conflict was not a fight, it was a slow realization. A realization that love, when rearranged, can leave someone standing alone without anyone ever meaning to hurt them. And somewhere deep inside I felt a quiet fear growing. A fear that one day, I would wake up and realize that my place in my son's life had become too small to find at all. Days turned into weeks, and the subtle shifts became harder to ignore. Even the familiar spaces of our home seemed different now. The living room where we had shared stories, laughter, and quiet evenings together felt quieter, emptier. The small decorative touches I had added over the years, the family photos, the little trinkets from trips, seemed overlooked, almost invisible. Saad walked past them without a glance, absorbed in his own world with Sana. I tried to adjust. I tried to convince myself that this was simply life evolving, that children naturally grow apart from their parents in small ways. But the pang in my heart was real, persistent. I found myself hesitating before speaking, unsure if my words would reach him at all. I had to watch the way I entered a room, the way I tried to engage, the tone I used, always careful not to intrude, always careful not to overstep. Even small gestures, once taken for granted, became awkward. When I poured him a cup of tea, he would take it without the warmth of acknowledgement. When I called his name gently to check on him, he would respond briefly, often distracted, already thinking about something else. I began to feel like a ghost in my own home, present in form but absent in connection. Sana's influence grew stronger with every day. It wasn't overt, not the kind that sparks arguments, but quiet and steady. She began making decisions for the household, and Saad followed without hesitation. Where they would eat, where they would go on weekends, how they managed their finances. All subtly without including me. I tried to offer advice, to suggest, to help, but my words were increasingly met with polite nods or gentle dismissals. The house no longer felt like a shared space. It felt like a home in which I was only a temporary visitor. One evening I cooked a special meal, remembering how Saad used to love it after a stressful day. I arranged everything on the table carefully, placing it with care and attention. When he came home, he glanced at the food, smiled faintly and said, "We've already eaten." I felt the warmth drain from me. I nodded, forced a smile, and quietly cleared the dishes. My hands trembled slightly, but I didn't let him see. That night, I lay awake thinking about the day we had once shared. The dinners, the laughter, the closeness that now seemed unreachable. The emotional tension was compounded by Saad's gradual withdrawal. He no longer sought my opinion for everyday matters. Small questions like what to cook or which movie to watch became decisions made without me. Sometimes I would ask casually, and he would nod absent-mindedly, already following Sana's suggestion. The realization that my presence was no longer central in his daily life hit me like a slow ache that would not fade. Even interactions with neighbors and relatives highlighted the shift. Conversations at social gatherings were now framed around Saad and Sana's life together. People would ask about their plans, and I would answer only in passing, careful not to overstep. It was as if everyone, including them, had accepted the quiet distance that had formed, except I had not. My heart ached quietly, persistently, with a heaviness that no polite smile could mask. Attempts at small talks often failed. I tried to reminisce with Saad, telling him stories from his childhood, memories of little moments we had shared. Sometimes he listened, nodding quietly, but his responses were short, his attention already elsewhere. It became clear that the space between us was growing, not through conflict but through absence. My attempts at connection were polite, acknowledged, but not reciprocated with the warmth I once knew. Even my daily routines became tinged with sadness. I found myself lingering in the kitchen longer, organizing cupboards I didn't need to organize, or sitting quietly by the window watching the world outside. I would replay conversations, hoping for a moment of understanding that never arrived. The quiet had weight, pressing against my heart with an invisible hand. The emotional strain also made itself felt in small, almost imperceptible ways. I noticed myself withdrawing before speaking, pausing to consider if my words would matter, if they would be heard or noticed. Even gestures of affection felt complicated now. A hug that once came naturally now required hesitation, a calculation of timing and appropriateness. I was learning to navigate a new reality, one in which my son still loved me, but in a different way than before, and one in which my voice was no longer the one that guided his days. One afternoon, I overheard them talking softly in the hallway. "We should start planning for our own space," Sana said, calm and decisive. Saad agreed. "Yes, maybe in a year or two. It will be nice to have a home just for us." The words pierced me quietly. They were not cruel. They were practical, natural, even loving toward each other. But in those words lay the unspoken truth. I was slowly being pushed out. My presence, my influence, my closeness, all of it was being rearranged without confrontation, without malice, but unmistakably. That night, I wept quietly in my room. The tears were silent, unannounced, a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. I mourned not for conflict, but for the slow loss of intimacy I had once taken for granted. I mourned for the way life had shifted, leaving me on the periphery of my own son's world. The rising conflict was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, insidious, and relentless. It came in missed conversations, in unshared meals, in laughter that no longer included me. It was the soft reshaping of a life I thought I understood, leaving me to navigate a space that had once been mine but now felt foreign. And in the quiet of those nights, I realized that love can be patient, resilient, and forgiving, but it can also be lonely, even when it remains steadfast. The conflict had no loud words, no arguments, no shouting. It was the slow, creeping ache of distance, the realization that some changes come without warning and without malice, and yet leave a wound that takes time to heal. It came quietly, the way most life-changing moments do, when you least expect them, and when your heart is already tired from holding too much. It happened on an ordinary evening. The house was calm. The kind of calm that feels heavy instead of peaceful. I was sitting in the living room, folding laundry that did not really need folding, just to keep my hands busy. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second reminding me how slow time had begun to feel inside this house. Saad and Sana were in their room, their voices low. I was not trying to listen, but silence has a way of carrying sound. Their words floated down the hallway, soft but clear enough to reach me. "We should tell Mom soon," Sana said gently. "Yes," Saad replied after a pause. "It's better she hears it from us." My hands stopped moving. I held a shirt in my lap, frozen, my heart beating faster than it should have. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself it could be anything. But something inside me already knew. A few minutes later, Saad came out and sat across from me. Sana followed, sitting beside him. They both looked calm, prepared. As if they had practiced this conversation. "Mom," Saad began, his voice steady. "We wanted to talk to you about something." I nodded, forcing myself to breathe normally. "Yes, son. Go on." Sana smiled politely but did not speak. Saad continued. "We've been thinking about moving into our own place," he said. "Not immediately, but soon. It feels like the right step for us." The words landed softly, but deeply. I had known this day would come. I had even overheard them talking about it before. But hearing it said directly, looking into my son's eyes as he spoke, made it real in a way I was not prepared for. "Oh," I said quietly. "I see." Saad looked relieved, as if he expected resistance and was glad he did not find it. Sana remained quiet, her hands folded in her lap. "It's nothing personal, Mom," Saad added quickly. "We just need our own space. Our own routine." Smiled. Not because I felt okay, but because mothers learn to smile even when something inside them cracks. "I understand," I said softly. "Every couple needs their own space." And that was the moment I realized something important, something painful but honest. I was no longer part of his we. His life was now divided into before and after, and I belonged to the before. After that conversation, everything became clearer, painfully clear. The small moments that once confused me now made sense. Distance, the silence, the way decisions happened without me. It was not neglect born from anger. It was priority born from change. That night I went to my room early. I sat on the edge of my bed, my back straight, my hands resting in my lap, just sitting with the weight of what had been said. I did not cry right away. Instead, memories came. Saad as a child, sleeping beside me during thunderstorms. Saad running to me after school, telling me every detail of his day. Saad holding my hand at the market, afraid to let go. And now, Saad choosing a future where I would not be part of his daily life. Finally cried then, quietly. Slowly, without sound. Not because he was leaving the house, but because he had already left my emotional world long before he said the words. The next morning I watched Saad and Sana at breakfast. They spoke easily, planned their day, laughed softly. They looked happy, truly happy. And for the first time, instead of feeling only hurt, I felt something else too. Acceptance. Not complete, not peaceful, but beginning. I realized that Sana had not taken my son from me with harshness or cruelty. She had changed everything simply by becoming the center of his world, the way a wife naturally does. She did not push me out loudly. She did not demand my absence. She simply stepped into a place I once held alone. And Saad followed. That was the turning point. Not the decision to move out, but the understanding that my role had changed forever. I could either hold on tightly and break myself, or learn how to let go gently and survive the ache. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered a quiet truth to myself, a truth I had been avoiding for too long. My son still loves me, but I am no longer his first place of comfort. And somehow, admitting that hurt less than denying it. The turning point was not the end of love. It was the end of the life I thought love would always look like. And from that moment on, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. After that conversation, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, but enough that I could feel it in the way I moved through the house. I began to notice myself stepping aside without being asked. When Saad and Sana entered a room, I made space. When they discussed plans, I listened quietly, no longer offering suggestions unless I was directly asked. It was not because I had stopped caring, it was because I had finally understood where I stood. That understanding hurt more than any argument could have. One afternoon, Sana came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes. She stood beside me for a moment, watching silently. Then she spoke, her voice gentle but careful. "Mom, I hope you don't feel bad about what we discussed," she said. "We really respect you." I turned to her and smiled. "I know," I replied. "You don't have to explain." And that was true, that I did not need explanations anymore, that I needed acceptance. But inside, I wished she would say something else. Something warmer. Something that acknowledged the quiet loneliness that had settled into my days. But she didn't. She nodded politely and left the kitchen. That interaction stayed with me. It wasn't unkind, it wasn't cruel, it was simply empty. I realized then that Sana and I were not enemies. We were not even in conflict. We were two women who loved the same man in different ways. and his heart could not hold us both in the same place. Later that evening, Saad came to my room. That alone felt unusual now. He stood at the door, hesitant, as if unsure whether to enter. "Mom," he said, "are you upset with us?" I looked at him, really looked at him. He was not a careless son, he was not ungrateful, he was just grown. "No, son," I said honestly. "I'm not upset." He exhaled, relieved. "We don't want you to feel left out," he added. "Things are just different now." Different. That word carried so much weight. "I know," I said softly. "And that's okay." But the truth was, it wasn't okay, not yet. Acceptance takes time. Understanding comes slowly. Mothers do not release the past easily, even when they know they must. After Saad left, I sat alone in my room for a long time. I didn't turn on the light. I let the darkness sit with me. I allowed myself to feel the sadness fully, without pushing it away. For the first time, I admitted something to myself that I had been afraid to say out loud. I was grieving. Not a person. Not a relationship, but a role. I was grieving the version of myself that was needed every day. The mother whose presence mattered in small moments. The woman whose opinion shaped her son's life. That role had ended quietly. Without ceremony. Without warning. And grief, when unacknowledged, becomes heavier. A few days later there was a family gathering. Relatives came over. Laughter filled the house. Food was served. Everyone talked at once. From the outside it looked like a happy home. But inside me I felt like a guest. People asked Sana questions. Complimented her. Asked Saad about his plans, his work, their future. I smiled when expected. I answered politely when spoken to. But no one asked me how I was. No one noticed how quiet I had become. And Saad, he did not notice either. That realization struck me harder than anything else. Not that he didn't love me, but that he no longer saw me. That night I understood something else, something important. If I kept waiting for my old place in his life to return, I would spend the rest of my days feeling empty. If I kept measuring love by how it used to look, I would miss the love that still existed, even if it came in smaller doses. That was the true turning point. Not when they decided to move out. Not when Sana stepped into my space. But when I realized that holding on to the past was hurting me more than the present ever could. I stood in front of the mirror that night and looked at myself. A tired woman, not a loving mother. Someone who had given her whole heart, and now needed to learn how to protect it. I whispered quietly, "It's time to let go without disappearing." The turning point was not about losing my son. It was about finding myself again, in a world where I was no longer at the center of his. And that realization, as painful as it was, became the beginning of something new. Something I didn't understand yet. But something I knew I needed in order to survive what came next. In the days that followed, I moved through life differently. Not because I wanted to change, but because I had to. I woke up early as always, but now there was no reason to rush. No one needed their breakfast prepared in a particular way. No one was waiting for my morning questions. I made my tea slowly, standing alone in the kitchen, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator instead of Saad's footsteps. That silence was louder than any argument we had never had. One morning I heard Sana and Saad talking about finances. They were planning their budget, discussing rent, locations, future expenses. These were conversations I once would have been included in, or at least informed about. Now they happened behind closed doors, and I only caught pieces of them as I passed by. I realized then that this was not temporary. This was not an adjustment phase. This was the new order of things. Later that day, Saad asked me a question that surprised me. "Mom," he said, "do you think we're doing the right thing?" For a moment, I thought he was finally asking for my guidance again. My heart lifted slightly. But then I understood what he meant. He wasn't asking for advice. He was asking for permission. "Yes," I said gently. "If this feels right to you, then it is right." He smiled, relieved, and thanked me. And just like that, the moment passed. I watched him walk away, And I knew something important had happened. He no longer needed my wisdom. He needed my approval. And that is a very different thing. That night, I sat with my old photo albums. I turned pages slowly, letting memories surface. There were pictures of Saad as a child, birthday parties, school events, quiet moments captured in time. In every photo I was close to him. Physically, emotionally, completely. I realized I had built my entire identity around being his mother. And now that identity had to change. The realization was frightening. Who was I if I was no longer needed in the way I once was? That question haunted me. A few days later, Sana approached me again. This time she seemed hesitant. "Mom," she said, "I hope you know we care about you." He nodded. "I know," I replied. But again there was a gap between words and feelings. Care is not the same as closeness. Respect is not the same as warmth. She did not ask how I was coping. She did not ask if I was lonely. She said what felt appropriate, then moved on. And I understood something important then. Sana was not responsible for my loneliness. Saad was not intentionally hurting me. This pain belonged to the space between expectations and reality. That night I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not one that would change everything overnight. But a quiet decision that would shape the rest of my life. I decided to stop waiting. Stop waiting for Saad to notice my sadness. Stop waiting for Sana to include me. Stop waiting for life to return to what it once was. Waiting had become a form of suffering. Instead, I chose to accept what was, without bitterness. The next morning, I surprised myself by doing something different. I went out alone. I visited a nearby park. I sat on a bench and watched people walk by. Mothers with young children, elderly couples, individuals lost in thought. I realized that everyone carries some form of loss. Some losses are loud. Others are quiet. Mine was quiet. As I sat there, something inside me softened. The tight knot in my chest loosened just a little. I understood that my love for Saad did not have to disappear just because my role had changed. Love can adjust. Love can step back. Love can survive distance. That evening, Saad noticed something different about me. "You went out today?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. He smiled. "That's good." And for the first time in a long while I felt seen, not as a mother clinging to the past, but as a person learning to move forward. The turning point was no longer just about loss. It was about choice. The choice to live with grace instead of resentment. The choice to love without demanding. The choice to remain present in my son's life, even if my place had shifted. And in making that choice I felt something unexpected. Strength. Quiet, gentle, but real. The turning point had not ended my pain. But it had given me direction. And sometimes that is enough to keep going. The resolution did not come as a sudden moment of happiness. It arrived slowly, in small, almost unnoticeable ways. Like light returning to a room you had grown used to living in the dark. After the turning point, I stopped measuring my days by how much Saad needed me. Instead, I began to notice how I felt when I allowed myself to breathe without expectation. I woke up in the mornings without rehearsing conversations in my head. I let the silence be what it was, without trying to fill it with memories of the past. First it felt strange, empty. But emptiness, I learned, can also be space. I started caring for myself in small ways. I reorganized my room, moving furniture that had not been touched in years. I donated old clothes, folded away memories that no longer needed to sit in plain sight. Each small change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had forgotten. Saad noticed these changes, even if he did not comment on them right away. He would glance at me sometimes, as if sensing something different. I was no longer waiting at the door when he came home. I no longer watched the clock for his return. And that quiet independence shifted something between us. One evening, Saad sat with me longer than usual. He asked how my day had been. Really asked. I told him about the park, about the woman I had spoken to there, about the way the evening light looked through the trees. He listened. Not distracted. Not hurried. And in that moment, I realized something important. When I stopped demanding space in his life, he began to offer it willingly. Sanaa, too, seemed to relax around me. Without the unspoken tension of expectation, our interactions softened. She began asking small questions. Nothing deep, nothing emotional, but genuine. How did you make this? Where did you get that plant? Small bridges, carefully placed. I answered without resentment, without bitterness. I allowed our relationship to exist as it was, not what I wished it could be. One afternoon, Sanaa joined me in the kitchen. We cooked together in silence at first. Then she said something that surprised me. I don't always know how to balance everything, she admitted quietly. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw not a woman who had replaced me, but a woman who was still learning. You don't have to know everything, I said gently. None of us do. That was the beginning of something different. Not closeness, but understanding. The house began to feel lighter. Not the way it used to, but lighter than before. The tension I had carried softened. I learned to let go of the idea that love had to look a certain way to be real. Saad still made his own choices. Sanaa still stood beside him. But now there was room for me, not as the center but as a steady presence. Found peace in that. The resolution was not about being needed again. It was about being whole again. And in that wholeness, I discovered a quieter, stronger version of love, one that does not demand attention, but remains open, patient, and present. Love that waits without waiting. With time, I learned that healing does not always mean being understood. Sometimes it simply means understanding yourself enough to stop hurting in silence. I began to notice how my own thoughts had shaped my pain. I had been measuring my worth through Saad's attention, through how often he spoke to me, through how much space I occupied in his daily life. When those things changed, I felt as though I had changed too. Smaller, less important. But that was not the truth. It was only the story I was telling myself. I started to remind myself of who I was before I became only a mother. I was a woman who had lived through loss and joy. A woman who had built a home from very little. A woman who knew patience better than most. Remembering that did not erase the sadness, but it gave me something solid to stand on. Saad and I began to share small moments again. Not long conversations. Not emotional talks. Just ordinary life. Cup of tea in the evening. A shared smile over a news story. A quiet good night said without distance. Those moments mattered more than the grand gestures I had once hoped for. One night, Saad surprised me by asking for my opinion. It was about something simple, but his question carried weight. Mom, what do you think we should do? For a second I hesitated. I was afraid of speaking too much. Afraid of stepping where I was no longer welcome. But then I answered calmly, honestly, without trying to hold on. He listened. And then he thanked me. That thank you stayed with me longer than he could have known. Sanaa's behavior continued to shift in quiet ways. She began inviting me to sit with her sometimes. She shared small worries, everyday concerns. She was not cold. She was careful. And I realized that I had been careful too, each of us afraid of crossing invisible lines. Once, as we folded laundry together, she said, I hope you don't feel pushed away. Her words were soft, not defensive, just uncertain. I paused before answering. Change can feel like distance, I said, even when no one means harm. She nodded, and we let the conversation rest there. That was enough. I no longer felt the need to explain my pain in full. I no longer needed validation to feel real. I had learned that peace does not always come from being seen. Sometimes it comes from seeing clearly. The house found a new balance. Not perfect, not the same as before, but livable, gentle. I learned to step back without disappearing. To love without holding too tightly. To accept that my role had changed, but my place had not vanished. The resolution was not about reclaiming my son. It was about releasing fear. And in that release I found something unexpected. Dignity, strength, and a calm that did not depend on anyone else's choices. I remained, not as the center of the home, but as its quiet foundation. As the days passed, I stopped waiting for signs that I was still needed. I stopped listening for footsteps that never came to my door. Instead, I began to listen to my own breath, my own thoughts, my own quiet strength. It felt unfamiliar at first, like learning to walk on a road I had never noticed before. I realized how often I had placed my happiness in the hands of others. In Saad's attention. In the way Sanaa included me. In how the house sounded when everyone was together. When those things shifted, I felt as though the ground had been pulled from beneath me. But slowly, I began to place that ground back under my own feet. I filled my days with gentle routines that belonged only to me. Morning prayers without hurry. Tea sipped slowly by the window. Small walks in the evening when the air felt softer. These moments did not replace my son's presence, but they reminded me that my life still had rhythm and meaning. Saad noticed the change before I said anything. One afternoon he asked, "You seem quieter these days, Mom. Are you all right?" I looked at him and smiled. A real smile, not one used to hide sadness. "I am learning to be," I said. He nodded, as if he understood more than he let on. There was a calm growing between us, not built on expectation but on respect. He no longer felt pulled in two directions. And I no longer felt like I was losing a battle I had never chosen. Sanaa's presence became easier too. She no longer seemed like someone I had to make room for. She was simply there, part of the home's new shape. We began to share silence without discomfort. Sometimes that felt more meaningful than conversation. One evening, I watched Saad and Sanaa laugh together in the kitchen. The sound no longer cut me the way it once had. It still stirred something inside me, a quiet ache perhaps, but it was softer now. Came with acceptance, not loss. I understood then that love does not disappear when it changes form. Stretches, shift. It makes room for new connections, even when the process feels painful. I forgave Saad without needing an apology. I forgave Sanaa without needing explanations. And most importantly, I forgave myself for expecting life to remain unchanged. The resolution was not loud. It arrived quietly. In the way I slept more peacefully, in the way my chest felt lighter, in the way I could love without fear of being left behind. And that was enough. I sit here now, thinking about how quietly life can change direction. Not with shouting. Not with doors slamming. But with small shifts that happen while we are busy loving the way we always have. My daughter-in-law changed everything without saying much, and for a long time, I thought that meant something had been taken from me. I believed that silence meant distance, and distance meant loss. But endings are not always about what disappears. Sometimes they are about what we learn to release. I learned that my son did not stop loving me. His love simply grew in a different direction, shaped by new responsibilities and shared dreams that no longer needed my guidance in the same way. That truth hurt before it healed. It asked me to loosen my grip and trust that what I gave him as a mother was strong enough to stand on its own. I also learned that Sanaa was not my enemy. She did not push me out with harsh words or cruel intentions. She simply stepped into her own place, and in doing so, revealed how unsure I was of mine. The change I feared in her was, in truth, a change I needed to face within myself. There is a quiet strength in stepping back without bitterness, in choosing peace over proof, in loving without needing to be centered. Took me a long time to understand that, and even now I am still learning. This house still holds my memories, my laughter, my tears, my prayers. I no longer measure my worth by how often I am needed, but by how deeply I can remain kind when life asks me to adjust. If you are listening to this and feel unseen by the people you love most, know this. Your place does not vanish just because it changes. Love does not leave. Transforms. And sometimes the most powerful ending is not being chosen again, but choosing yourself quietly and with grace. I wake up most mornings before the rest of the house. Old habits stay with you even when the reasons for them fade. I sit by the window with my tea, watching the streets slowly come to life. The world outside moves forward without asking permission, and I have learned to move with it instead of standing still. Saad still lives his life at a pace I can no longer keep up with. He comes and goes, busy with work, plans, and dreams that belong to his present. Sometimes he stops by my room before leaving. Sometimes he forgets. When he does remember, his smile is warm, and for a moment I see the boy he once was. And when he forgets, I no longer take it as a wound. I take it as part of growing. Sana and I speak more now, though our words remain gentle and measured. There is respect between us, even if there is not closeness. I no longer wait for her to fill the silence. I fill my own time instead. I have learned that not every relationship needs to look the same to be real. There are evenings when we all sit at the table together. The conversation flows around me, not always through me. I listen more than I speak. And that is okay. I have discovered a quiet comfort in simply being present, without needing to guide or correct. Some nights, when the house is quiet, I think about the woman I was when Saad was small. The mother who believed her purpose was to be needed every moment. I smile softly at her now. She did the best she could with the love she had. And that love did not go to waste. Life teaches us lessons slowly, often when we are not ready. It teaches us that holding on too tightly can hurt as much as letting go too soon. It teaches us that love does not disappear when roles change. It only asks us to change with it. If I could speak to my younger self, I would tell her this. Your worth is not measured by how close your children stay, but by how well you prepared them to walk their own path. And if they walk away for a while, it does not mean they have forgotten you. It means they are living what you helped them build. So I end this story without anger, without blame, and without regret. Only with acceptance. With a heart that has learned to stretch instead of break. Because even when everything changes without a word being spoken, a mother's love learns how to stay. Quietly, patiently, and forever. I did not wake up one day and suddenly feel healed. Healing did not arrive like a bright morning. It came slowly, like light creeping into a dark room through a small crack in the curtain. First, I did not even notice it. I was still carrying the weight of everything that had changed. Still remembering the way my house once sounded. Still missing the way my son once looked at me when I entered a room. But one evening, as I sat alone after dinner, something inside me felt different. The silence did not feel as sharp. It did not press against my chest the way it used to. Simply existed. And for the first time I let it be. I realized then that I had been waiting. Waiting for Saad to return to who he was before. Waiting for Sana to become someone different. Waiting for life to rearrange itself back into a shape that felt familiar. And while I waited, time kept moving, gently reminding me that nothing ever goes backward. That night I prayed differently. I did not ask for things to change. I asked for strength to accept what already had. The next morning, I folded my clothes and placed them neatly in the cupboard. Not because they needed folding, but because the simple act made me feel steady. I swept the floor slowly. I watered the plants. I took care of my space the way I once took care of my family, with patience and intention. Saad noticed small things after that. Not big gestures, just small ones. He would ask if I had eaten. He would remind Sana to bring something for me from the market. Sometimes he would sit with me for a few minutes before going to bed. We did not talk about the past. We did not talk about pain. We talked about weather, about work, about small ordinary things. And slowly that became enough. I stopped measuring love by attention. I stopped counting how many times he came to my room. I stopped listening for footsteps that might not come. I learned that love changes shape as life changes shape. And resisting that change only leaves you tired. Sana remained quiet, still reserved, still careful with her words. But one afternoon, as I was preparing tea, she stood beside me and asked if I needed help. It was a simple question. Small one. But it felt like a bridge, even if it was narrow. We did not suddenly become close. We did not share long conversations or laughter. But we shared space with less tension. And sometimes that is its own kind of peace. I began to spend more time with myself. I read books I had once put away. I listened to old radio programs. I spoke to neighbors. I remembered that I existed beyond my role as a mother. That my life did not end when my son's life expanded. Some evenings I still feel the ache. I would be lying if I said I do not. There are moments when I wish Saad would walk into my room and sit the way he used to, his worries spilling out without effort. There are moments when I wish Sana would look at me and see more than a presence in the house. But I have learned not to live inside those wishes. Instead, I live in what is. I live in the warmth of my morning tea. In the quiet satisfaction of a clean room. In the calm that comes from knowing I did my part with love. I raised my son to be kind, to be responsible, to build a life of his own. And he did exactly that. One evening, as Saad was leaving for work, he paused at the door. He turned back and said, "Mom, I may not say it often, but I am grateful for you." He did not say more. And I did not ask for more. Because that one sentence held years of truth. I smiled and told him to drive safely. After the door closed, I sat down and felt tears in my eyes. But they were not the same tears as before. They were softer, lighter. They carried acceptance instead of loss. I finally understood something that took me a long time to learn. Being pushed aside does not always mean being unloved. Sometimes it simply means that life is making room for something new, and you must learn where you fit without disappearing. I am still Saad's mother. That will never change. But I am also a woman who has learned how to stand gently on her own. I no longer wait to be needed to feel valuable. I no longer measure my worth by someone else's presence. If someone listening to this story feels the same quiet pain, I want them to know this. You are not forgotten just because you are no longer at the center. Love does not vanish when it becomes quieter. It learns how to stay without making noise. My daughter-in-law did not change everything with words. She changed it with distance, with silence, with a new rhythm I did not understand at first. But in that change I found something unexpected. Found myself. And that, in the end, was enough. Measure my worth by how much I am needed, or how close I am to my son's daily life. I have learned that presence is not always about proximity. It is about consistency, patience, and love that does not demand recognition. Some nights, I sit by the window long after the lights go out. I watch the stars flicker softly above, and I am reminded that everything in life moves forward, and that includes me. I feel the quiet heartbeat of the house, not as an echo of what was lost, but as a gentle rhythm in which I still have a place. It is not the center I once held, but it is a space I can call my own, and that is enough. Saad and Sana continue their lives, building routines, making plans, living together as husband and wife. And I watch from the sidelines, not with longing, but with calm pride. I remember every small decision, every lesson, every hug and whispered word I shared with my son. Those are threads that remain, no matter how the fabric of our lives has shifted. Love, I have realized, is not a fixed seat at a table. It is the invisible connection that endures even when roles change, even when days go by without explicit acknowledgement. Saad may not need me in the same way he once did, but he still loves me. Sana may not be my daughter-in-law in the way I imagined a relationship could be, but she is learning and so am I. And I have realized that love does not vanish when it changes form. It simply asks us to expand, to bend, to survive, and ultimately to thrive. I am still the woman who raised a son with love, patience, and care. I am still the mother who whispered prayers for his safety and happiness every night. And I am still the woman who sits quietly by the window, observing life as it flows, finding peace in the understanding that my place in the world, though changed, is secure. So here, in the quiet of my home, with the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock, I sit and breathe. I let the silence settle around me not as emptiness, but as space. Space for reflection, for acceptance, and for love that no longer clings but still endures. And that is the ending I have been searching for all along. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply, quietly, and wholly mine. A mother's love never disappears. Simply learns how to stay. Forever.